Spectrum Xtra on Radio 1 FM 90. An extra hour of analysis and discussion of the topical issues of the week. Brought to you by Housing Finance Bank, a financial institution regulated by Bank of Uganda. Housing Finance Bank, we make it easy.
Your views, our interviews on Spectrum, Radio 1 FM 90.
A very good evening to you and welcome to this edition of Spectrum Xtra, live on Radio 1 FM 90, broadcasting from the Central Building here in the heart of our city, Kampala, but we are also live on our website, which is www.radio1fm90.com. On that website, you look for the icon with the word listen live, you click on it, and as long as you have an internet connection, you'll be able to listen to us from anywhere across this globe. We're also live on the different radio listening apps, which can be obtained from the Google Store of your smartphone. You download any from there, look for Radio 1 FM 90, and you'll be able to listen to us. The other option is actually DSTV. We are on DSTV. Our audio channel there is 897. You look for that channel and you'll be able to listen to Radio 1 FM 90. It will be loud and clear on that audio channel. Today being a Friday, we review the major events of the week. We'll be looking at the new budget, which was passed yesterday by Parliament. The figures shot from 58 trillion shillings to 72.130 trillion shillings. The government there making a sudden change to the budget just as Parliament had started discussing or appropriating the 58 trillion shillings, which had been indicated earlier in the budget framework paper. Now, this budget has been revised on the advice of President Yoweri Museveni, according to the State Minister of General Duties, Henry Musasizi, who presented it in Parliament. So we have an increment of about 13.5 trillion shillings in that particular budget. So many people are wondering where the money is going to come from and what does that mean. But if you look at the allocations, there will be a payment of Uganda's public debt, which takes a lion's share of about 34.017 trillion shillings. The Minister of Finance is also planning to borrow 28.768 trillion from the local commercial banks as part of this budget. So we'll be discussing this, trying to see whether it makes sense for us as a country. Not so long ago, the government has been saying that it is cash trapped. We have also seen the operations of URA, where they have said they are not doing well in terms of collection. So are we able to finance this 72 trillion budget? We're looking at also some of the tax measures which were put across. There were tax measures there. Parliament discussed them. And we know they have added 100 shillings on each litre of petrol, which means each litre is now going to be 1,550 per litre of petrol. That's the amount of money they added there. And then we are looking at 500 shillings levy per 50 kilogram of lime, adhesive and grout. And a rate of 50 shillings was fixed per litre of mineral water. So we'll be looking at this budget in detail to try and understand what exactly is going on. Time allowing, we'll be looking at the update on sanctions imposed on Speaker Anita Mong. This week, President Yoweri Museveni revealed that he had received confirmation from the IGG's office that Speaker Anita Mong had not declared that she had assets in the UK, but he also said the Speaker herself had indicated to him that he didn't have such assets there. So he has asked the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the Attorney General to get clarification from the UK government on the basis of their sanctions against the Speaker and the other two former ministers. It's a story that keeps on building on, so we are waiting to see what kind of response will come from there. But the President said it's not good to accuse senior government officials when there is no justification at all, so clarification must be brought forward. Now, this week we also saw a video from the House of Lords in the UK, which in which some members of that house actually were proposing a regime change in Uganda on account of human rights violations and the Anti-Homosexuality Act. Speaker Mong and the government officials believe that the sanctions put against her are largely because of that law which was passed by the Parliament of Uganda. We'll reflect also on the National Population and Housing Census, which we know is ongoing and is going to end on Sunday. UBOS says It targeted 10.47 million households. They have so far enumerated 60.2% of that, which is about 6.3 million households, and they are hopeful that the exercise will be concluded with that target being met. I have a panel of 4. Let me introduce Mr. Julius Mukunda, Executive Director at the Civil Society Budget Advocacy Group. They are members of the Joint Budget Transparency Initiative, which is hosted by the Minister of Finance, Planning and Economic Development. Good evening, and thank you very much for joining us, Mr. Mukunda.
Thanks. Good evening, listeners. Glad to be here.
Also in studio, Ambassador Simon Mulongo, Governance and Security Expert, who did represent Bobulo East in Parliament and served as the Deputy Head of Mission at the African Union in Somalia. Good evening, and thank you very much for joining us, Honorable Mulongo.
Asante sana. Good evening, our dear listeners.
Dr. Bireete, the Chief Executive Officer at the Center for Constitutional Governance, Pundit on Human Rights and Governance Matters. Good evening, and thank you very much for joining us.
Good evening, listeners, and thank you for inviting me, Spectrum.
And Dr. Yusuf Sserankuma, researcher and columnist with the Observer newspaper, Pundit on Governance Matters. Good evening, and thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I'm happy to be introduced as a political economist.
Political economist. Thank you very much for joining us. Let's begin with Mr. Julius Mukunda, whose preoccupation is the national budget. Well, you spent you spend a lot of time looking at the national budget, providing guidance, talking budget all the time, Mr. Mukunda. And I'm sure you spent a lot of time talking about 58 trillion shillings budget. All of a sudden, we now have new figures, 72.130 trillion shilling national budget for 2024-2025.
I think it's good news that we are able to look for more money. Miraculously, we found an additional 13 trillion lying somewhere, and we were able to bring it and put it back on the budget. But yes, you are right. Previously, we have been debating on 58 trillion. We are now on 72. And I think...
When did you start the 72?
Like a day before to the end of the budget. I think the fundamental part for me here is not the 72. Because I have previously told you, Kenneth, and the listeners, that Uganda is a rich country. Our problem is not lack of money. Our problem is how we spend the money. And if you look at the additional 13, and you can actually see the problem, that we can actually raise 13 trillion in one day. We can be able to get it in whatever form.
Have we got it, or it's just
I mean, the resources are there. But how we are going to execute it is our biggest problem. Because even when you see where it is going to be spent, it is your biggest worry immediately, because already you want to give KCCA money to cover potholes, and you're asking yourself, really, KCCA is stuck with the World Bank loan that they signed last year. Up to now, they have not even consumed a single shilling on it. But you are now getting money for them to do the same work where they have money for the loan. You want to pay cultural leaders, and I was telling my colleagues, today morning, really, if I was a cultural leader in this country, I would not get a coin from a government, because you will be compromised. You will start becoming a political person, you start becoming non-partisan, and you're going to create a rift within your community. I wouldn't do that. I would get money from my subject. You want the money to go and build a Kiboa stadium. I mean, I have no ill feelings about that. But we know Kiboa stadium for the last 10 years we've been building it, and we cannot even show a single evidence that property is on. But at the end of the day also is that we know as a nation that our capacity to execute projects and programs on time and budget is extremely very, very low. And we have evidence to show that we have 14.4 trillion of undisbursed loans. That those are the loans we received. We are paying commitment fees on them every year of around 495 billion, and we are unable to utilize them because we were unprepared to execute them. We cannot procure on time, and there is a lot of unpreparedness in terms of executing these problems. So raising this money is not a problem. I think our biggest worry as a country, we should be on how we're going to execute it. And even when you look at these projects that have been put in, then you ask yourself, okay, if you wanted to build Hoima Stadium, you should have a visibility study. For example, is it there? I can tell you this is not there. The Auditor General told us that 35 of our projects don't have visibility studies. It means that you start a project without a plan, you are like, let's see where it ends. You don't know even how much it's going to cost. So these are projects that become white elephants at the end of the day. And Kenneth, that is my biggest worry in terms of how we're going to deliver the 2024 2025 budget.
All right, we'll be digging deep on some of the issues that you have put up.
I have a quick question for him about raising 13 trillion in one day. Did you say that?
Let's hear from you. What's your view?
No, just a question.
Yeah. I mean, we had finished 58 trillion debate, and on the last day, we came up with 13 trillion.
But you said earlier that this government or Uganda is able to raise 13 trillion in one day.
Because we're rich.
What do you mean by that? How could we do that?
What I'm saying is that as a country, our ability to mobilize resources is not a problem. Therefore, we can never say we can't implement this program because we don't have money. Our ability to raise resources is not a challenge in this country.
Could you say some more, because we're going to borrow 28?
Maybe Dr. Sserankuma might be raising the wrong question at this point. Maybe let me ask you this. You have been debating 58 trillion shilling budget. Now, all of a sudden, on the day Parliament sits to appropriate this budget, there's some sort of stampede, according to what some MPs were actually saying. And we are seeing completely new figures. The budget committee goes into a sitting of about 4 hours to realign the budget. What does that tell you? Is that the ability that you're talking about?
No.
In terms of budgeting, what does that say?
Of course, the whole budget process now becomes
it's
a sham, because you spent almost the whole entire since January discussing the budget, and at the end of the day, you bring in a 13 trillion. I mean, that's not small money. You bring in a 13 million immediately. I don't think even members of parliament had an opportunity to really consult and demand papers on how prepared the government is to deliver on these particular programs, or the criteria on how you came up to say these are the ones that the activities we are going to execute. So our ability again to plan for these kind of expenses is one of the areas that we are extremely very weak. And I mean, for political economists, I think probably it is bordering to.
Are you being sarcastic?
Preparing yourself for
are you being sarcastic? Maybe you are being sarcastic in a way.
No, these are the facts on the ground. Really, these are the facts on the ground. The fact of the matter is that the government was able to say we have 13 trillion.
Do we have it? That's the question that we should be asking. Are we able to raise it? Looking at
how do we raise money
in
this country? Domestically by URA and borrowing. Those are the major ones we know. So if you can be able to do that, you have the capacity to raise the resources that you need. I think that's where you should look at it from. Are you saying we shouldn't borrow, or we should borrow? That's a debate that we should be discussing. That considering the way our economy is and the kind of debt stress we have, should we really be able to go into the domestic market and look for 12 trillion just because we want to do this building Akibua Stadium, and there's this famous project in Ocean is called the presidential banana initiative. I mean, should you really do that at this particular moment? Yes, you have the capacity to raise the resources, but should you spend it on some of those things? So I think for me, where I come from is that you should be able to use your power or your capacity to generate resources, but to use it for the right cause and the things that can bring returns to the economy.
All right. Let's hear from Honorable Mulongo. You've been in that house before, participated in the debate around budgets, appropriated, you're widely traveled, you've followed what other countries are doing. Is this the right thing that we're doing as a country, the way we are budgeting? Or when you hear somebody telling you that A day ago, we were talking about 58 trillion, a budget of 58 trillion. Now we are looking at 72 trillion shillings. What's your take?
No, of course, this is pretty surprising. Our colleague was saying that we're able to raise 13, actually it's 14 trillion
13.7
within a short time. And I thought you were actually being sarcastic because you can't. We can't. That's a substantial amount of money you cannot raise in a day.
But he didn't confirm whether he was being sarcastic.
He did confirm that.
Yes,
I mean, the figures are there.
Maybe he's shocked.
He has
not yet woken up from
he meant that actually rising from 58.34 trillion to 72.12 trillion, which is actually 14.05 trillion increment overnight. I think that's what he meant, that he's shocked. Definitely, this is a surprise.
I also sense some shock in him.
But
he doesn't.
Yes, okay. If you took it comfortably, that's fine. But definitely, this is a surprise because all along we're looking at the 58.34 and looking at a supplementary that come in at a very high rate. It means we shall hit beyond 80 trillion.
There was actually a supplementary, 288 billion
by the
passed
end
before they started considering the budget.
This financial year, before the end of this year. So I think, but you see, the budget is a planning tool. And what I know is that there must be substantiated, anticipated sources of income to finance this kind of level of budget. Now, whether those sources are realistic or not, we shall live to see. But of course, the danger here is that we're going to increase the public debt, which will surge very drastically, and this will lead to a debt crisis, most likely, if we cannot have the fiscal discipline that we don't have, and if we cannot really attain the sources that you anticipated to have. Issues of interest payments, a big portion of the budget will be allocated to interest payments, which will divert funds from essential public services. There is issues of likely economic challenges, because over-reliance on borrowing will create economic challenges. So this budget definitely points to significant turbulent times coming. And of course, over borrowing from the local sources and funding services that do not have value for creating jobs will definitely have also another big problem that is going to develop unless we do something. So I think that this budget is definitely historical. We've never had such a level of budget before, and I'll be happy to see how the economic mechanisms that the government is going to employ and deploy, because already people are reeling with the weight of the taxes locally. So this means that if we are going to increase on the depth of taxation of the very people who are making noise, there's going to be a very tight rope to walk. So in my view, yes, this is a very ambitious budget with very ambitious sources that have never been reckoned with before, and we're likely to have some big challenges. But maybe there could be some underlying reasons. One is my own guess is that we're going into an electioneering period. So there may be something that, for purposes of accelerating...
taxpayers' money for campaigns,
Yes, I mean,
let's allow him to
the
conclude.
government that was elected in power against a manifesto has to deliver against the manifesto, and that's where the linkage comes from. And if you're going to go towards accountability, then that manifesto milestones must be seen to be being covered. So for that matter, the budget has to reflect most likely that accelerated. And then the second one is, I don't know, maybe it is something to do with the accrued pledges and those unanticipated areas to be covered as we go towards the end of the season of the regime. Because if you look at those historical monuments that are talking about,
the regime is coming to an end.
Yes, every 5 years it comes to an
10
end.
years.
Anderson, I thought Mulongo was part of the
Let's allow.
Why are you trying to sound like
I'm not sounding like anything.
like you don't know what they are up to?
He's being realistic.
Maybe he's also being
I'm an analyst.
I thought you're part of it.
I'm an analyst. Yes, I am, but I'm just an
I
analyst.
thought Lukwago invited somebody who is on the inside.
Yes,
Who
yes.
knows a bit more.
Yes, and
I'm
instead he
not-
does.
I'm not from the
Let him
inside.
let
but I
him
am
speak
an
his
interim
mind.
man.
Let him speak
I'm
his
an
mind.
interim person.
Which is the government in power.
Yes, government in power.
So you should sound like
But doesn't it mean that we
this
cannot
the
be
end of-
analytical? A regime is 5 years. 5 years.
but regime has negative connotations. It's a bad thing.
It's not.
Say-
I mean,
say
a regime.
the 10
I
years.
thought you said our government is coming to an
Of
end.
course,
You're saying
no,
a
our government
regime.
is not coming to an end. But every 5 years, we have ushered in a regime for that 5 year period. So this is a punctuation. And
A regime.
yes, of a regime.
All right, let's allow you.
So
to
I think, so for that matter, I think there are a lot of things to catch up with. Things like the veterans that are supposed to be cleared for the accrued monuments. Things like even entering into new monumental things. I think to me that means that the government has reason to blot this. But the danger is, if we exhaust these sources, and some of which may actually be very shallow, then we're likely to have a crisis. I'm just being honest with myself about the bumpy period coming, and we have to tighten our belts. And therefore, there must be a lot of caution as we proceed into the next financial
You
year.
are bringing us a bumpy period.
Right, it's a Spectrum Xtra
We're not
Radio 1
bringing,
FM
but,
90. We need to go for a
reality is
break
also-
now. When we return, we'll hear from Dr. Sserankuma and Dr. Bireete as we continue reflecting on the sudden change in the figures of the national budget from 58 trillion shillings to 72.130 trillion shillings. What does this mean for our country? The government indicating that it's even changing the amount of money that it will be borrowing. It's going to borrow more from the external market. It had initially planned 8.905 trillion shillings. Now it will borrow 10.97 trillion shillings, which is an increment of about 2 trillion shillings. They have also indicated that it will also be borrowing from the local market, which of course is something that the private sector has been entirely against. Stay tuned, Radio 1 FM 90. We'll continue with this discussion after the break.
Spectrum Extra, Fridays 7 to 9 p.m. on Radio 1 FM 90. Spectrum Extra, Fridays 7 to 9 p.m. on Radio 1 FM 90.
It's negative connotation. It's the Russian regime.
Right, Spectrum X on Radio 1 FM 90. Thank you very much for staying with us. We continue to review the major events of the week. Right now, we are looking at the national budget as appropriated by Parliament yesterday, 72.13 trillion shillings, an increment from the budget that we had known, 58 trillion shillings. My guest, Mr. Julius Mukunda, Executive Director at the Civil Society Budget Advocacy Group, Ambassador Simon Mulongo, Governance and Security Expert, who did represent Bobulo East in Parliament and served as Deputy Head of the African Union Mission in Somalia, Dr. Bireete, Chief Executive Officer at the Center for Constitutional Governance, Dr. Yusuf Sserankuma, researcher, who also prefers to be known as a political
economist.
Economist. Well, thank you very much for joining us. And let's come to you, Dr. Sserankuma. What's your take on this budget?
Okay, I need to say first that for the last 2 weeks, maybe 3, I have been asking, using my Twitter handle, asking the Minister of Finance to help us now to demystify taxation, make it accessible to the public, to help us know who are those wonderful patriots designing our taxes before URA is asked to collect them. Who are they? Who are those wonderful Ugandans sitting wherever they are sitting, deciding these taxes, giving them names before they are imposed? It would be nice to know, and I think Minister of Finance is in a better position to explain to their clients, us who pay the taxes, that we are levying tax so and so because of this reason, it will give us so much. economist so and so wrote this paper and argued like this. The public needs to know. We are their clients. We are in this together. They devised these taxes, and the idea is that they devised them for our own benefit because they are serving this country to which we belong. So against that, I'm still begging Minister of Finance to help us demystify taxation. Tell us who these people are, because we need to have interaction with them, because we spend so much time in the university studying the things, and then all we are left with is to critique them without even knowing who designed them. The same applies to this budget, Mr. Lukwago. Who are these wonderful economists who sat down, devised this technical budget before pushing it to Parliament for debate? Who are they? Who designs these things and agrees that we are now levying tax here, we should be doing this ABC? Because we don't know as a public, yet we are stakeholders in this. So for matters of clarity and everybody being on board, it would be good for Minister of Finance to be open about it. We need to know these wonderful economists, and so that we could debate with them. You see, when he invited Mr. Mulongo here, I thought he was in the know and would be defending the government position. But we don't know. So talk shows like this one and many other platforms are only open to people like us who conjecture, who use our analytical skills to connect dots A to Z without interacting with the actual people who designed these taxes. We need to know what their thinking was.
Okay.
And the budget allocations. But you know there's a thing we call the debt trap, right? From the way you wrote your preamble to this show, it's very clear the debt trap is very visible here, because you see it's 72 trillion, an increment of 20. The debt is 34. We're going to spend 34 servicing this debt, and we are borrowing 28 to service a debt. That's the quintessential definition of a debt trap. And again, I'll go back to what I said at the beginning. Who are these geniuses designing the things? We really need to have a conversation with them. We are borrowing to pay back a debt. So basically, we have no money left. You see, who are these geniuses before they have all these increments to borrow? But I'm going to tell you this, Anderson. We are borrowing from local banks. These local banks are foreign owned. Neither of them is ours. Out of the 24 banks we have, only 2 or 4 are locally owned with majority shareholding. So basically, these foreign banks are doing business with us. And the debt trap thrives with these banks. So if we have all of these foreign banks that we are benefiting with Ugandan sweat, instead of the circus of you borrow and give back, you borrow and give back, what are we doing in this game? Again, I'll ask the Minister of Finance, we need to have a conversation with the people designing and keeping us in this trap. This is the actual definition of a debt trap, where you never emerge. You're borrowing to pay a debt, and it's business as usual. So you wake up one morning and say, 13 trillion more. Who are these geniuses who all of a sudden said 13 trillion more?
Well, it is President Yoweri Museveni, according to the
them.
explanation given to Parliament. Minister Henry Musasizi said,
but we don't.
The implement had been cleared.
Anderson, Mr. Museveni is not an economist.
And approved.
He's not an economist.
The Chief Minister of
He's
Finance.
not a political economist. We need to sit down with those, because you see, Mr. Museveni could be the voice voicing the things, right? You know, when you read the terminology, it's very sophisticated. Mr. Museveni doesn't know this terminology. We need the way the taxes are named, the things that are going to be catered for. Mr. Museveni doesn't know the things. He's a brilliant man. I guarantee he doesn't know the thing. The language. Yes. Those must be patriotic Ugandans who went to school, study economics, political economy, financing. Those are the people that need to have a conversation with us. Anderson, I challenge you. The next time you invite us for this show, please try as much as possibly could to get those people. We need to have them on board. One last point before Dr. Bireete comes in. The Observer, the newspaper that I write for, this week wrote a story, a wonderful story, which I think is well researched, to say how can a government can actually raise money without taxing its people.
That's the Ghanaian model.
A government can
Ghanaian
actually
model.
raise money. Governments do business. For example, first item is gold. You know, in 2021, gold beat coffee as our forex earner. Does it not surprise you that we don't have a single bar of gold in our gold vault? Because IMF would recognize that as money. How come we don't? Yet we are trading in gold. Who are these? Do you know the biggest gold companies in this country? Who are they?
Well,
who are the people making a killing?
We have refineries here, gold refineries.
But how come we don't have a single bar in our vault?
No, we sell all of it.
Why do we sell all of it when we're trapped in this debt? Yet the IMF recognizes it as money. So, you know, as we have this this is why I will say again, we need to have a conversation with the people raising money to fund this government who think the best way is to taxes. We can challenge them about gold because gold beat coffee. Also, I hope I haven't taken so much time.
No.
Okay. Also, Monitor did a story 2 weeks ago about our coffee. We made 2 point something trillion from our coffee in the past year. And 10% of the exporting companies, which own 70% of the market share, are foreign owned. So if our biggest cash cow is owned by people who don't live in this space, so if you made 2.5 trillion, 7% of that money didn't come back to Uganda. So what is the circus of being trapped in this debt when the things where there's actual money, all this money goes outside? This is why I will go back to my first point, because I think this is the big elephant in the room. Who are the people sitting down, drafting these budgets, blowing the debt, and at the same time levying taxes?
All right.
I think Minister of Finance doing us a disservice by not demystifying taxation and
I'll be coming back to you. There's also an article that you wrote in the Observer titled, "Unless You're a Thief, No Genuine Business Thrives in Uganda." I would like you to expound something in line with what you've just spoken about the business environment and who is actually doing these taxes to see whether it connects well with this article that you put out. But let's hear from Dr. Sarah Bireete, your take on this budget.
Well, I think that the budget system or process has been completely bungled. Because what is our budget framework as a country? Budgets are initiated by user departments. The process starts immediately when the budget is announced. So it starts in July, August for user departments to initiate budgets. It takes a whole year. So you have a 1 year cycle of budgeting. User departments, policy statements, then it comes to a budget framework paper, whose deadline is December. We did that process. Technocrats are wasting time, analyzing this process, and they have concluded. And on the final day, you put a 14 trillion increment. Who is fooling who? I think we need to call things the way they are. Budget process in Uganda has gone to the dogs. Because who is the user department of 14 trillion? When did they initiate this money? How has it been processed through the process that takes 1 year? This is a fraud. Clear fraud. So when you say the president has approved, a president only initiates as a user. Initiates budget for maybe office of the president and state house. He's not a user for the other entities that to do their own budgeting. And I think this should be challenged in court because who has initiated this 14 trillion?
Well, we have a cabinet where the president is the chairperson, but also we know the Minister of Finance.
If Uganda's
is
budget
a delegated
process
authority
has changed, citizens need to know what the new budget process is. President Museveni does not initiate budgets. No.
He is the chief executive.
I
You
know.
don't make up figures.
But what is our budget framework process? It's user department. It takes 1 year to budget. Does not take 1 day. So when you go now to, of course, it has been bungled. I don't think I need to add anything more to that.
It's magical.
No, and it's unconstitutional. It should be challenged. So when you go beyond what is this budget, citizens are struggling with economic stress. Data from URA shows 93% of the biggest taxpayers have closed shop. data from URA. There is a 2 trillion shortfall of URA for this year we are concluding. So where is this money coming from? Of course, we are in debt distress. 30.34 trillion to pay debt. In a country where your projection for revenue collection is 29. Projection, not actual. Our projection is 29 trillion. But you need to pay debt 34 trillion. What other mathematics do we need to know that we are a failed state?
Most countries are borrowing, Dr.
No,
Sabile.
borrowing is not a problem. But borrowing to do what?
Maybe they are going to invest.
Borrowing to do what? Let me also show you how the budget process has gone to the dogs. A few days, the final day of closure of Parliament, you have a supplementary budget. Almost 300 billion. 10 days ago, we had a supplementary budget.
Indeed.
Really? Why don't we close the budget department in this country? Completely useless. We have no budgeting in this country. No.
All right.
So, but let me go to the areas that would benefit the people.
All right.
Because as much as every country has debt, and I know that's the song of the regime, but you borrow to do what? If you look at the least-funded entity, mineral development, 2025 would have been our oil year. If this budget had been tabled after our first oil is out of the ground, you would say we have oil money. But I don't think it will. So the ministry that is supposed to give us the oil is the least funded in this budget, 0.5% of the budget. Next least funded entities are education, health, agriculture, tourism. These are key ministries for serving a common person and creating employment for the people. But they are the least funded. So you cannot bring the slogan of every country borrows.
Dr. Mukunda, let's stay with that issue of borrowing first. A number of issues you raised as we beginning this discussion, the issues of stadiums, Akibua, Hoima. We know we went and did a bid, won the rights to actually host the AFCON in 2027, and we have an obligation to actually start those projects. And because they are huge projects, we cannot fund them by the resources that we collect here. So we have to borrow. We are also planning to produce oil. There are a number of things we are supposed to do there. We thought that maybe we will get funding from abroad, but some people have been campaigning against that. And the government says they now know they have to put in equity. Therefore, we need to get that money and put it there. Are we not putting the money in the right places? Like you said, borrowing is okay, but how are you using the money?
Okay, and I think that's the major discussion.
That's the major issue.
That's the major issue. Even when you're not borrowing, that literally you have, where do you put it? Where should you be able to put it? And I think that is, for me, is my biggest concern. Whether we increase this budget to 72 or to 100, or even we make it, reduce it to 10, is how are we investing this resource? Now, to invest your resource to get better returns, you put it in areas where you know that the majority of your population are likely to benefit from, invest their, to benefit from that particular resource. And let's talk about agriculture. So when you look at agriculture, for example, you'll find out that right now, agriculture, they gave them 4.4% of the entire national budget, with a 72 trillion budget. And but what is agriculture going to do? Then you find out that the PDM, which we all feel that could have helped us, ordinary Ugandans, to get to come out, was rolled out haphazardly, and as such, the returns are likely not to come as soon as we want them, because we are not prepared to roll it out. The second part, you'll find out that we should have invested on how we can be able to buy the product to provide the market for PDM, but we have not done that. And I can tell you that with these rains coming, people are going to produce, and they will have wasted if they don't get the markets. So once we want to borrow, then you want to borrow and ensure that you have better returns on that particular borrowing. But right now, like I agree with my sister, we are in a debt distress, because if you have 72 trillion and 34, you can't touch it simply because it's already committed. And you are remaining with 37 trillion.
And
then
you plan to borrow more.
And then there is something fundamentally wrong on where we are heading to. In fact, one of the best things Kasaija has done is to warn us even as we go for this. And I don't know why in the parliament people don't listen to this. And he was very clear. He said, these things we are doing, are taking us to hell. Yes, he said, one, be rest assured that we have breached all the Charter of Fiscal Responsibility values. Completely they are out.
Thank you. So
that is your finance minister telling Parliament, and Parliament said, went ahead and said yes. Secondly, he said that the things we are doing is going to make us become debt trapped, but at the same time is that it's going to become expensive for us to acquire new loans, because we will be having so much that we are unable to pay. But there are other things that you want to look out for, and you are asking yourself, how deep is this problem? And there are two things that probably the country needs to understand. Why did we get the 13 trillion immediately? It came because our inability to service our domestic debt led to Bank of Uganda get some money from our reserves, and which reduced our reserves from 4.5 import cover at 3.5. So IMF came up and said, to give you the last installment of 457 billion Ugandan shillings, you need to first clear that debt from Bank of Uganda, which is around 7.7 trillion Ugandan shillings. So now this is where the 13 trillion is going to come from. So now that's where we are going to say, we are going to go and borrow 12
borrow from John to pay some.
Yes, so that we can pay capitalize the Bank of Uganda so that it can pay its debt, so that IMF can be able to trigger
to lend us,
to lend us more money. And that kind of cycle is really very challenging for this country to develop. So next financial year, you'll find out that we are going to spend around 9 trillion on interest alone, for example. The other second fundamental one is what we call debt refinancing. Refinancing is, you have a debt today, it has matured, you are unable to pay it, you renegotiate to pay it tomorrow. Now for government, it does that. The debt matures this financial year, you are unable to pay it, you negotiate to have it paid, to roll it out in the next financial year. And there are two consequences for that. Number one is that if you had negotiated at a lower interest rate last year, this year the interest rate is going to increase, so it becomes very expensive. However, even the rollout would not be a problem if it was reducing. You have 5 trillion, in the next financial year it is 3, it keeps on reducing. But in our case, 5 years ago, it was 5 trillion. Now it is 12 trillion. It increases every financial year. So I'm seeing that we are going to get trapped. That's number one. Acquiring loans international is going to be extremely very expensive. And also is that even here domestically, the interest rates are going to increase, because all banks in this country now are going to front their money to buy all these particular papers. But also there's another fundamental effect that is likely to come, and that is inflation. When you pour so much money into the economy and there is less production, you might cause inflation. And the Bank of Uganda, the only tool it has is to increase CBR. And it's like a double tragedy. So the government really at this particular moment...
The Bank of Uganda doesn't control CBR.
They raise the interest rates.
They don't. Banks do.
The question has always been whether the banks respond to the decision taken by the Bank of Uganda.
They don't.
That has always been the discussion.
So for me, I think that the question of debt is becoming more pertinent for this country than before.
All right. Let's hear from Honorable Mulongo. The issue of borrowing. Are we borrowing for the right things,
No.
really, or we have a problem?
I just want to respond to what some colleagues are saying about.
You want to set your own question?
Whether we have reached a level of the debt crisis or whether we're actually debt trapped, and I think we have not.
No, the minister said
because yeah, and I was happy you're referring to the fact that we should engage technocrats to see whether what they're saying is supported, because our debt is not necessarily trapped, because for us to reach that level, we should have exceeded 60% of our GDP.
No, 50.
Is it 60%? They used to say 50%.
50%. That is
We
threshold.
exceeded that long
That
time
one,
ago.
Yeah, no.
We've breached
There's,
all
there's
those-
an East African standard, but there's an East African standard. There's also an
It's
international.
an international standard.
And I
50%
think
of GDP.
you can drop that point because
our numbers, he hasn't clarified.
Let's allow him to.
Our numbers, we are at 47.2 some
But
2
why
years
do you
ago,
continue pointing
and
them-
is likely to go definitely beyond 51% by this year.
And
It's
so
likely to be
what
so.
they're saying, we are heading
but
into
the
a
point,
trap.
yes, but we are not yet.
We are not
trapped,
yet, but
because
we are heading
I
there.
thought it should be clear. We are not yet trapped, and I was happy when they said we were heading to, because some members were arguing that we were already trapped, which is not true.
You see the reason.
but also-
The reason why some members are saying we are trapped. The money that we're actually going to use to pay off the loans is much more than what we have to actually spend on services. And that's the
but
problem.
you can give numbers. You can give numbers, but what I know is that we're not yet there.
Mulongo, as
And
of June 2023,
and,
our debt was 52% of GDP.
All right.
Mr. Mulongo, have you heard what she said?
52% of
As
GDP.
of
Did
June
you listen?
2023.
yes, but I'm also saying
52%.
that yes, there is quite a high risk that we're moving towards the trap,
That's a good.
but we're not
She
necessarily
said we already
trapped.
exceeded.
All right,
No,
let's
because
listen
I
to
gave
him.
you my
Let's listen to him.
numbers, because we may have different bases for definition of this.
What is your source, Mr. Mulongo?
Dr.
Of course.
Sserankuma. Dr. Sserankuma.
Most of global economic policies.
What are you citing?
rendering.
What are you citing? there?
I just made notes here. And then also, I know that we're having more challenges. We shall have more challenges. I did mention that before, that we're going to have more challenges. Because as we continue to heavily borrow, this is going to create even much more challenges, because it may have impact on the debt stock. It will increase.
All right.
So definitely we're moving towards that.
Some countries borrow to actually invest in productive
in
sectors,
productive.
so that the
Yes,
economy is.
I'll come to that.
the economy is-
I'll come to the way forward.
And I'm trying to ask you, do you think we are borrowing for the right
Yes.
reasons?
Well, yes, there are right reasons, but how we spend or make use of this money is where the challenge is going to come from. And that's why I say we need to have one fiscal discipline, very serious one, and which may not be a common good of late. But if we have a common discipline, fiscal discipline, we are likely to have sustainable usage of this borrowed money. And then we should also look at diversification of economy. We have not done sufficient diversification. We've been grappling with this, and I want to agree with Dr. Bireete's numbers of allocations, that even those areas we think are most beneficial have not received adequate funding allocations to the budget. Should we have a meeting, tete-a-tete meetings with the technocrats? Yes, I think that's right. You have a good point. But have you ever tried to do that, to ask that you engage these technocrats? Because they need really to demystify the way they do the processes and arrive at the tax structures that we have, so that they can explain even the basis for why certain numbers are allocated to certain taxes. They can explain that. But have
You as an
tried?
MP, you've been in a sitting where tax bills are discussed and passed. Isn't that sufficient?
Well, for us as members of parliament, we engage, particularly at the committee level. We would meet the financial technocrats and would ask all the questions we would need to have, and would get answers. But he's speaking from the research, independent research perspective, and actually as an academician, and he's right. He can do that. Maybe we can propose that there would be more times when they can engage the public.
You see, we see what Mr. Museveni was doing at Kololo is absolute politics, but that's what needs to be done by the technocrats. We can have town halls where they come,
Barazas.
to explain the gambles they are trying to do. So
Sure.
Mr. Museveni usurps their mandate to sort of make political act out of it.
Well, is
I'm
this
glad it badly boomeranged, but it is necessary that these things happen. So you need to explain to people.
Yes, and I think to me you have a point, but also the Committee of Parliament. They have every reason to invite independent minds in the country to also come and give their views, so that they thrash out some of the questions that are being
Well,
asked.
I did cover Parliament for quite some time, and I've seen also Mr. Julius Mukunda before this committee.
Yes, but now,
But
if
the final product doesn't reflect.
if Doc here is raising that question, it means either he's saying it because he wants to make a point,
Even
playing to the gallery, or that he has a very serious point that he has not been afforded opportunity.
Can I come in?
Yeah. So I think that yes, I think let's not exaggerate about the debt crisis.
We need to go
because
for
we're
a
not
break
yet
now.
there.
When we return, we'll hear from
That's what I wanted
Dr.
to say.
Sserankuma
Yes.
and Dr. Bireete as we come towards the end of this particular discussion on the national budget. We also have views that are coming in from the listeners via the WhatsApp line 0703 090. We'll also be reading out, we'll also be hearing those comments and getting responses to them. Stay tuned to Radio 1 FM 90. Let's go for this break and return for the discussion.
Spectrum Extra, Fridays 7 to 9 p.m. on Radio 1 FM 90.
You can
Spectrum Extra, Fridays 7 to 9 p.m. on Radio 1 FM 90.
Well, thank you so much for staying with us on Spectrum Extra live on Radio 1 FM 90 Review, the major events of the week. We are right now looking at the national budget for next financial year, which was increased from 58 trillion shillings to 72 trillion shillings. At a time when the Parliament was focusing on the one of 58 trillion shillings, the discussion was in high gear before the Minister of Finance actually informed the House that they had a corrigenda to the national budget, which forced the budget committee into a sitting, prolonging the sitting of the House to late at night when they actually considered and passed the national budget. I'm speaking to Dr. Bireete, the Chief Executive Officer at the Center for Constitutional Governance, Ambassador Simon Mulongo, Governance and Security Expert, Mr. Julius Mukunda, Chief Executive Officer at the Civil Society Budget Advocacy Group. Now, coming on the microphone is Dr. Yusuf Sserankuma, a political economist. Dr. Sserankuma, you had a number of issues to put across, looking at the exchange you were having before we actually went for the break.
I was often asking for clarification from Mr. Mulongo, especially when he wanted to claim that we are yet into debt distress, and our friends here said no, we reached that last year, and he kept on making the same point even after getting clarification. I found that odd. But I want to say what happened to this economy. You know, every time we
article viewers,
every time we debate,
you are not a thief unless you're a thief. No genuine business thrives in Uganda.
Every time we debate budgeting, every time we debate the budgeting, taxation,
he wrote an article.
Interventions, projects being engaged by this government, we fail to address the matter of where these policies come from. Because I raised the point here, as Dr. Sarah said, 92% of people that are supposed to be paying taxes have actually closed shop.
The big business.
But we need to ask the question, what happened to this economy? Where do these policies come from? Because earlier I said we are interacting with commercial banks. We're going to be borrowing locally. And I said all the banks that we have in this country, majority of them are foreign owned. Our coffee exporters, 70% of them are foreign owned. Our gold miners, most of them just sell it because they see no point in keeping the gold in this country. As Sarah said,
we have a number of mining sites in the country.
Oil which is expected to bring in some revenue has been the least funded. Where do these policies come from that deny us to sort of generate revenue locally without taxing and borrowing? How else do governments raise revenue?
Well, you can advise us.
So we did a story in the Observer. I'll go back to it. And among other things, we write about Uganda Property Holdings Limited, for example, we own property. We own property across the world, which is billed at so much. These properties are dead and dormant. We own things. How did we give up the entire infrastructure of Uganda Electricity Board to a foreign distribution company, to the point that we are paying the highest tariffs, some of the highest tariffs in the world for electricity? The business people trying to eke an existence are paying so much as opposed to elsewhere on the African continent. Yet the distributor is thriving on Ugandan infrastructure, public service infrastructure. How did we, I'm very obsessed about banking, telecommunication companies, mining. It really bothers me because I think governments can make money out of these things. Mr. Museveni in 2002 wrote a letter to the then Prime Minister, Apollo Swambi, complaining about giving monopoly to Airtel, which used to be Celtel then, and MTN in telecommunication work. Mr. Museveni complained that we sold monopoly market share to Celtel and MTN. And he was asking the then Prime Minister to review the sale. But do you know how much money these two major foreign-owned telecommunication companies take out of this economy at the expense of our own Uganda Telecom?
Well, they pay their fair share of tax.
No,
maybe. They paid for the license.
Yeah, because how did they buy monopoly control of the market? You see the bills that we pay on these simple transactions, mobile money, school fees.
Are you suggesting no any other telecom company can register and operate here? I don't think so.
Well, you need to find the letter that Monta wrote a story about this letter that Mr.
Maybe it was reviewed. And
but that's the problem. This is why we need more political economists. This is the problem with that we forget that we enter these agreements, receive some pay cuts. Did you know, Mr. Lukwago, that Uganda Bankers Association, an entirely foreign-owned, profit-seeking association, is in the Uganda Bankers Act and can advise Bank of Uganda, protected by the law? Did you know? And these are supported by policies imposed by the IMF. You see, so the man here who is more versed with budgeting more than all of us said the 13 trillion came out was increased because IMF insisted. But at the same time, IMF insisted that we hand over our economy to foreigners.
To the private sector?
To foreigners, because we were so broke, we don't have rich people. You go back to the article you're quoting. Unless you are a thief in this country, no business thrives.
Why is that the
case? Because it is designed. This economy is designed. Nobody does business and makes a profit at 34% interest rate. Nobody makes a profit. Did you know, Mr. Lukwago, that the most profitable banks in the world, yet they are the least efficient, are in Uganda? This is according to the economists, not according to me. The most profitable in the entire world, while being the least efficient, are in this country. You see, ABSA, and all the other banks told us about, I think, 2-3 weeks ago, they made 156 billion in profit, net profit, in 6 months, which meant they're making 2.5 billion every single day. With whom are they doing business? When all the big ones have filed for bailouts. 60 big companies in this country have signed for bailout. The bankers are making 2.5 billion every single day. And these are the bankers we're going to get these loans. Don't you see a circus that IMF imposes these policies? We are trapped in debt. We are doing business with these foreign banks. And did you also know, I'm sure you must have read this report, I think the man's called John Mwanga, I think then the Auditor General. He wrote in the report, I think in 2019, where he informed Parliament that Mutabire's central bank closed 7 banks, locally owned banks, between 1990 up to current bank closure, illegally, without having sat anywhere to say these are the menace, this is what they breached so that they could be closed. And we normally discuss budgeting, taxation, raising funds, and when these things are staring us in the face, and we normally ignore them. And we still work on the recommendation of the IMF.
Are you saying the fact that we do not control the financial sector as local Ugandans?
This is why I'm going back to the question at the very beginning. Who are these technocrats, these patriots? And this is my hunch. They might not be there. But the people that advised Mr. Museveni to add a 13 trillion increment so that they could trigger lending us more money. Because the trap keeps us handing over our economy to them. Right. I tell you, Mr. Lukwago, before we discuss retaining our economy, that 70% of our cash cow money doesn't come back to this country should raise concern to all of us. Mr. Lukwago, how could we make 2 trillion out of coffee and you don't know a rich man who has made money from coffee? Yet we know the people in Kwagala who are dealing in merchandise, we know them as rich, which I think they are broke. But they are the ones we know. All right. And our biggest forex earner, we don't know who are making money out of these things. All right. We don't know a single person.
We have comments coming in, and the first comment I'll read out is from Henry Kiwenda. He says, "Good evening, Kenneth. This year, you or your panelists must answer my question." Then he says, "Apart from taxes, 18%, 6%, 25% import taxes, URA on fuel, etc., is there another source of income for government, like minerals, water sales, electricity sales, gold sales, copper sales? In which statement should such incomes appear, if not in the budget?" I wait for your reply. It seems to suggest we are making sales in those particular areas and they are not always reflected in the budget. Mr. Mukunda, you'll help us to respond to that when the time comes. And then we have another comment. Singapore started with nothing but a long-serving leader. Now the highest standard of living in Singapore is good in Singapore. We have the oldest serving leader in the world. We have oil, we have coffee, and even human beings to export. What is lacking? That's a question from one listener there who is contributing to this discussion. Then we have another question here. Could we also discuss expenditure reduction strategy by government? Then another comment. First, I think the geniuses are Ministry of Finance who get us in trouble with parliamentarians who are equally useless. That's a comment from Dennis there. We have another comment. I am called King from Mbale. I admire the panelists who say that we don't lack money but lack what to do with it. That has always been my argument. The problem is not money, but its application. If you looked at what public servants do with the budgeted money, you will cry. Little of that money is used for the intended purposes, even money borrowed from the so-called multinational donors. I wish I got his number and we chat. The next thing is that the budget should have a special provision for corruption, just like there is a provision for insurance in projects. Maybe we can realize some plans. That's a comment there from another listener. Then we have another one. Good evening, Kenneth and the panelists in studio. My name is Wilson Bikakanga Muyenga. Ugandans have been let down by our highly educated economists without practical hands-on approach to applied economics. No wonder that most of the businesses that offer employment to Ugandans and pay taxes are 95% owned by less educated Ugandans, but self-trained in hands-on business operations. The ugly part of this is that taxes we pay go to offsetting unpaid taxes by those on tax holidays and tax waivers to regime apologists and bloated parliament and government. We need to cry for ourselves. That's a comment there from that listener. Henry, we cannot be debt-strapped when we still have Angel Mutebile running the show. We even have P.S. Gobi, who has economics that works. We are on track until we start borrowing from corruption sectors. Then we have another comment. When I hear economists claiming to be the solution for the borrowing problem of this country, it makes me laugh. A problem with economics spread all over, including areas where they don't know, while scaring the rest away. As you are hearing from the panel, who said budgeting is a preserve of economies? I assure you, as long as we still have a trade imbalance with the rest of the world, however good we budget, we shall always borrow. Let us concentrate on development, my dear countrymen. We all need to work hard because development is not easy for a country on the bottom of the development pyramid like Uganda. Well, those are some of the comments that are coming in from the listeners. We'll get more time to respond to others during the course of this discussion. Dr. Sarah.
I will only respond to the question of Singapore. Singapore developed, and if you read the Lee Kuan Yew's book, from third world to first world, that big volume that I like so much. There were 4 key principles on how Singapore developed. Number 1 is meritocracy, and that's what we lack most in this government. There are very few people who are employed on merit, and they sit in important positions and take all wrong decisions that affect citizens and taxpayers out there. The second issue was creation of social peace through prioritizing key social services, quality health, quality education, quality housing for everybody. And the citizens are at peace in their country. The third issue was moderate taxation to attract foreign direct investment and make Singapore number 1 destination for investment. The other issue, of course, is effectiveness. Once you have the 3 in place, then you are at take-off stage to develop, and that's how Singapore developed. In our case, to say that President Museveni has stayed for long, but stayed for long doing what? Has he promoted any principle, any good principle of governance? Be it meritocracy, be it effectiveness, be it fiscal discipline. That one is on the downtrend. I think it has touched down. What principles has he promoted in his leadership? I'm yet to learn of any. So, but away from that, what is this budget that we are grappling with? We have one item on vehicles, 644 billion on vehicles. 106 billion will go into purchase of new vehicles. 167 billion will go towards maintenance. 371 billion is fuel. In this budget, I see how the panelists are looking at me.
There's also money for traditional leaders, like Mr. Mukunda began by explaining to us, which has actually increased. Their monthly allowance has increased.
Yes, they are going to create more kinglets towards the elections for patronage, because it's 30 trillion for 30 billion for cultural leaders.
These are demand driven.
No, they will create funny kingdoms. We know what kingdoms existed in this country. If culture is about our culture as is, why would you put in a constitution that a group of people can create a king? Is that our culture? So that is part of the fraud in this culture. There is also fraud that should be interrogated. Yeah, so I'm sure towards the elections, kingdoms where the establishment thinks they don't have support, they will create some funny kings. And funny enough, all the new kings with no cultural background are officers of UPDF. All.
What do you mean cultural background?
You look at them. The new king in Kasese is they have titles of UPDF.
Yes, was retired soldier.
All of them, they have titles of UPDF. So how come these new kings with no known history are servicemen in the UPDF?
Is it wrong to serve in the army?
No. But what a coincidence.
Even when you look at established monarchs, what is
culture? Culture is sitting me waking up and sitting on a road and declaring myself a queen. Is that culture?
Oh, who is that?
No, I'm saying because, yes, but you see, even me, if I get a few people to
you make your point, but I think we can substantiate that differently.
No, I'm saying I can, so you can go.
Well, maybe the biggest discussion we should be having on the issue of cultural leaders is actually whether we are utilizing the institutions that they lead properly to actually generate some growth in this country.
There's nothing wrong with cultural institutions. But what cultural institutions are we talking about? The creation of kinglets is wrong. If it is about culture, let it be known culture. This creation of non-entities as new kings is wrong.
How do you determine
and I know that you'll have your time. I know that this 72 trillion budget is an election budget. So there are a lot of funny electioneering things that are going to crop up at the expense
the
of the
Electoral Commission
taxpayer.
needs enough money for organizing and managing the election. I hope that's what you mean.
No, there will be funny activities towards the elections, like creation of funny kings.
Right, let's hear from you, Mr. Mulongo.
I think
we have a direct comment coming to you, Dr. Yusuf Sserankuma, where he said Uganda Bankers Association has local banks in it there, and he says Centenary is a major player and locally owned. You'll be responding to that, but let's hear from.
Yeah, but I thought Dr. Bireete had come up with very good points. The issues of fiscal discipline and all that, and I agree with you that we have a huge challenge. Whether this government has ever, I don't want to use the regime just in case I run into definition trouble, has any lessons to take home about governance. I can tell you there is huge and substantial. From whether you agree with them or you don't. But let's come to your kingdoms, because I was touched by your point of just sustaining yourself in power for more than a week is not a joke in any country in the world.
For what? To what end?
Yeah. So
if you don't have the people's mandate,
and of course you have people's mandate.
If you don't have a people's mandate, it's
mandate.
difficult.
No. Let me tell you, here there is people's mandate. We do elections.
Why is it a challenge?
Just like you attempted and things did not work out doesn't mean that people are not elected. Yeah. So, but let's come to this.
This is the crisis.
You touched.
Now what are you touched.
You touched.
Have you run out of points?
Let's restrict our discussion now on the budget.
You touched the issue of traditional kingdoms as part of the sources of expenditure.
Yes, of course it's
and you're saying that they're just creating it for the sake.
New kings.
In the Constituent Assembly to which I was a delegate, we saw the need to have the cultural dimension of this country as part of developing and sustaining our identities as Africans. Because we're not just identityless. I mean, we have to be identified by our roots. And any community, any population that feel that they should organize themselves in that line, they should do so. This is demand-driven because
Let's allow him to
it is the communities that, depending on the cultural heritage and aspirations, that demand for this.
Okay.
Information, Mr.
Right. Let's take information from
the roots from those communities from where they come from.
Ambassador. Culture.
Yes.
Culture is self-sustaining.
Yeah.
The Kingdom of Uganda, because it's self-sustaining, refused to take proceeds from Mr. Government, refused to take cuts from the government of Uganda, because culture, wherever it exists, has to self-sustain. It grows organically and reproduces itself. It doesn't need handouts from the government. To the point that's now a constitutional provision, there's fakery to it. Any culture worth its value has to organically grow and sustain itself. In fact, the Basoga, I come from Basoga. The Basoga, when Museveni wanted to give our Chabazinga a job, we fought against himself to give our Chabazinga a job. In fact, we said, if us as Basoga cannot sustain our Chabazingaship, it's better to abolish it. Culture is self-sustaining. It grows organically. Yours is the corruption.
Okay. No, it's not. Because I think we're mixing two things, financing and the cultural elements. If you look at the cultural elements, what is culture?
Maybe the question is,
culture
do
is
these
different.
cultural leaders deserve to be given public resources?
If you go to the economics,
what value are we getting
of how to run the institutions of traditional and cultural leaders, that's different from the culture. The culture is definitely self-evolving, and it grows from its own norms and traditions.
Mr. Mukunda.
This is why us in Uganda refuse to be funded.
Let's allow Mr. Mukunda.
But that is something that is being
because we are self-funded.
Many institutions are actually working out ways and means of sustaining themselves in terms of running the affairs of the institutions.
Let's get back to the budget, Honorable.
People are moving towards
Let's get back
that.
to the budget.
But they have to start from somewhere.
I think there are other important things that we wanted to bring to the attention of our listeners. And one of the, I think that we need to understand, we have been arguing this question of where we are spending the money, how we're going to spend the money. And one of the things that is coming out is how continuously we are investing in risky ventures as a government. And that does, and once you continuously do that, then you put pressure on URA. URA puts pressure on the Minister of Finance to expand the taxation base, and then you find that really taxes are really on our neck. And I will give a few examples. One of the things that we find that really should actually get out of the budget is the 120 billion presidential initiative on banana. Really, that project should have closed a long time ago.
Why should they close? They've just started going into production. I have seen some banana flour, which is named Itoke, which is being exported. It does not
require 120 billion to do that. 312 billion for Xtra Motors. Now, Xtra Motors, and I have already said this, it's good that we want to build vehicles. But really, our economic advantage is not really in building vehicles. We could have invested more money on how we can add value to agriculture.
Well,
and leave that to
electric
the
vehicles are a new market.
So really, for me, that's an area we have gone through.
To enter into the market with a bang.
553 billion on Atiak sugar, which has...
You don't seem to realize the importance of electric vehicles as we go into
all of us want
renewable
to,
energy.
All of us want to go to the moon, isn't it? Everybody wants to go to the moon. But there are things you want first to do yourself, really. You can't be very hungry and then you still want to go to the moon. There are basic things you need to do to yourself first.
Well, the Japanese had where to start from. We can also start something.
Exactly. They start somewhere.
And we also started with
you cannot be born and you start running. Nature is that you start step by step, but if you skip the steps, that's why we're in trouble.
Right. On the issue of the vehicles, which steps have we skipped now?
That for the steps of skipped.
Yeah.
For me, for the vehicles, I would actually have first
start with bicycles.
Get this money and take it to agriculture. Add value to the maize. Add value to the sorghum, to the millet,
and that's
so that once we get enough resources, I have a good number of people who will be able to buy the cars that we are talking about that are going to be produced by Xtra Motors.
Maybe we are not doing those vehicles for this market, something like that.
And that's where my own
maybe we are going to
whose
export
market
them.
Are we targeting at this particular moment? Because I know very well that in terms of us looking for market for our product has been our biggest problem. And that's why actually we have now closed the Uganda Export Promotion Board. You know, it was rationalized and thrown out. I don't know which kind of targeting we're having. 475 billion on Robowa.
The construction has begun.
723 billion for this Dare pharmaceuticals.
Dare.
I'm trying to give you a profile of projects that are extremely very risky.
Dare pharmaceuticals, import substitution. We want to start making the drugs here so that we stop spending outside.
Look, I would love to start a pharmaceutical company, in the factory, whatever we want to call it.
Why don't we start it as a government project?
But you have no visibility.
Private sector led.
The person you are giving the money, you have no control over them. You want to buy shares whose value you don't know. Because somebody says, I will give you value. You don't know the value. You have not valued the company. And at the end of the day, it's just going to become a white elephant, and we are the ones to lose as Ugandans.
That's the same thing you said when the government was putting some money in quality chemicals, and now they are producing drugs.
Are they paying dividends to government?
Well, we don't know that, but at least they are doing something. They are not a white elephant.
I should tell you a story. They don't pay. Do you know that Meta Group is owned by government of Uganda?
What's a Meta Group?
The
Meta
Sugarcane.
Yeah. You know it's owned by government of Uganda. Government of Uganda has largest shareholding. But since 1983, they have never paid dividends to government of Uganda. By 2007, when Daily Monitor did that, New Vision did that, we own Meta. We have the largest shareholding as the public. But they don't pay anything to us.
Maybe we don't know. Maybe they pay.
No. I'm telling you. Between 1983 and 2007, they don't even declare losses. They had never made their accounts visible. This is a story. Listen, Anderson. This is a story done by the New Vision in 2007. They had never made their accounts accessible to the Auditor General.
To the majority shareholder.
So for me, I think at the end of the day is the way we deploy our resources matters most.
All right.
And if we can really, like my colleague said, that get these wonderful people, put them on a table and say, guys, can we discuss how to deploy these particular resources.
All right.
Maybe we can have.
All right, Spectrum Extra on Radio 1 FM 90. Let's go for a break. When we return, some more comments coming in from the listeners, and then we'll shift our gears to look at the issue of the sanctions. This week, some key developments also came in that particular regard. Stay tuned, Radio 1 FM 90. We'll continue after this break.
Spectrum Extra, Fridays 7 to 9 p.m. on Radio 1 FM 90. Spectrum Extra, Fridays 7 to 9 p.m. on Radio 1 FM 90.
Well, thank you for staying with us on Spectrum Extra live on Radio 1 FM 90, reviewing the major events of the week. You can hear from the laughter. The discussion continued even when we were off air, as the panelists continued to follow up on some of the issues that have been said.
We'll continue the budget
before
a bit.
We actually went for debate. You want us to continue with the budget?
A bit.
All right, we have comments coming in. The problem Uganda has is the pattern of government expenditures. There is a lot of wastage.
Yes.
That is Lumbuye Lawrence listening in from Zigoti. Then we have Samuel Mary listening in from Namlondo Zone. Mr. Kenneth, thank you for the show. Uganda seriously needs a fundamental change. Taxes are increasing every financial year, but you don't see what it does. Imagine in the next financial year, I don't know if this is true, 75 billion is going to be given to those teaching Ugandans to drink coffee. Just wasting taxpayers' money.
It's true.
Well,
it's in the budget.
That's there. Then we have another comment. Thanks, Kenneth, for the good selection of your panelists tonight. Dr. Yusuf, Mr. Mukunda, Dr. Sarah, Honorable Mulongo.
They mentioned his name too.
Well, then he says, let Mr. Mulongo be honest and remain mute, then listen to the others who are lecturing him, as they also rest us in captivity to understand how was our fate is with Mr. Museveni's government. He says, inhuman and shameless. We are indeed in intensive care unit, but which is also lacking oxygen. That's his comment there. The statements are not collected very well on this particular comment. There was a direct comment that came to you, Dr. Yusuf. I remember reading it out to you. Then we have Triagenda writing in and saying, well, this is a problem that he says, when I hear economists claiming to be the solution for the growing borrowing problem of this country, it makes me laugh. Economists spread over, including areas where they don't know, while scaring the rest away, as you are hearing from the panel. Who said budgeting is a preserve of economists? That's a comment there from Triagenda. Anthony writes in and says, I give credit to the economists. It's not easy to raise money as fast in Uganda through taxation. Let's not be surprised how that money will be raised. Let's give them our support and hold them by their words. This regime is doing well. We must support any regime that will boost our economy. Telling you who designed the budget is not done anywhere in the world. Let us trust the people who gave the work to, who are given the work to do for us. Let us mind the kind of words we use in public, on public radio. Criticizing is wrong. That's a comment from Anthony. I don't know whether criticizing is actually wrong. Well, that's his comment there. And we take it on that particular phase. You had a direct comment, Dr. Yusuf.
Yes, 100%.
There's just another one comment that is coming in. The panelist opposing Toke and Kira Motors has a brilliant point. Our comparative advantage is bad. You need to listen to him. Let us stop dreaming. And the quality chemicals is a different story because that work depends on imported intellectual property from India. Well, we have a comment from Robert in Kumi. On value addition, somebody said, yes, we want to add value to coffee for who to drink. So electric vehicles for who to buy. Can the market in US leave Tesla and buy Ugandan-made electric vehicles? Why not produce more in areas where we have advantage? Ukraine produces wheat. It doesn't compete with Japan on cars. When their products were cut off due to the senseless war by Russia, the world felt it. That's Robert in Kumi.
I need to respond to the comment in Centenary Bank. I agree 100%. It's locally owned. It's a big player. But I said my comment was out of the 24 that we have, only 3 are locally owned, and it is Centenary Bank is held hostage by Uganda Bankers Association, which imposes the interest rate to average at 34%. So if despite being locally owned, it it has to be in sync with the other foreign players. But I'm just to insist on this point of banking.
Dr. Sserankuma, I don't think you speak for Centenary Bank, so
no, I mean I'm just responding.
Take that on,
I mean,
on record.
well, it's said to be owned by the local.
It's local banks.
It's largely indigenous.
Largely, we can take, but I said it's one of the 3 out of 25
Locally owned.
Okay. But I also said it's held hostage by the cartel called Uganda Bankers Association, where majority of those who own the market, control the market, are foreign. Anderson, have you ever wondered why not every district?
Bank of Uganda superintends over the financial sector.
Yeah, I mean it controls things like what time do you open? Is the bank clean? Is there interest for
liquidity?
Yeah, they don't.
They also ensure that those banks are working within the Financial Institutions Act.
Anderson, for every country to grow, banking has to be the easiest thing that is easily accessible by majority of the workers. Have you ever wondered why we don't have, say, a bank for every parish with laws designed to cater for the borrowing protocols of those people? Why should a borrower in Chiriandongo be bound by the same protocols as a businessman who is borrowing $1 million in Kampala? When the borrower in Chiriandongo is borrowing $5 million, why should they subscribe to the same principles? Why don't we have in every parish a locally owned bank? I'm telling you the faker of this.
We have started with SACCOs. Maybe we'll
No, you didn't read the news. IMF is insisting that they start taxing SACCOs. Because you see SACCOs are just messing the market. That's controlled by the monopoly. So IMF has had to intervene. IMF is insisting now, he has advised the Minister of Finance to start taxing SACCOs because they were tax-free. The idea is that you make it difficult for SACCOs to lend money. You know, the man who was formerly IGP told us he started a milk business and he bought most of the money from a SACCO. Now, the SACCO doesn't operate on the same principles of a bank. The interest rates are fair to a local person. So IMF, because it's also the colonial police for these foreign-owned banks, has had to intervene. Now, you wait and see. SACCOs are going to be taxed. But the point I'm making is this. No country develops from collecting taxes and borrowing money. That country is not there. Taxes, you know, one of the lies of our time is to constantly insist that we hold public servants by the way they use our taxes. No, we should start holding them by the way they utilize the country we give them to govern and exploit. What our men and women have done is to sell the country to foreigners. What Mr. Museveni has done so successfully, and I think is a problem, is that he has turned every sane, smart person from either his family or his party into a commissioning agent. The Ugandan politician is content with a commission. They don't want to own things. Instead of them opening banks, they are happy to get shareholding. Instead of us owning these big businesses, we are happy to work on to get connected somehow or to be on the board of, say, MTN, and then we open a shop. Everybody's a commissioning agent. This is why we are dealing with a colonial extractive outpost called Uganda. And the budget is a bribe. The budget is a bribe. If you read through the thing that Mr. Mukunda has been telling us, and Sarah Bireete is telling us, the things are bribes to the kinglets, as Sarah has called them. Bribe them. To PDM money is a bribe itself. To give money to Lubowa, bribes. We are basically bribing key centers of power. We are not transforming them. The budget is a big bribe because we're dealing with the colonial outpost. And Mr. Mkungu rightly pointed out, why not invest in agriculture? If this is your biggest cash cow, why don't you make rural land productive again? And it's not that we don't know. All right. No, listen, let me finish on this one, Anderson. I'm sorry I'm waiting for long. Let me finish on this one.
There's one critical point.
Professor Ezra Sruma has told us about how we can transform this country. Let's own our banks. Let's organize people in the countryside. Let's make rural land productive again. Go work through cooperatives. cooperatives that are self-sustaining, where people contribute and own the market. Let people grow marijuana and sell it. Let people grow vanilla and sell it through their cooperatives. But what we've done is turn this economy into a colonial extractive outpost by fighting. You need to interview Nandela of Bagisu cooperative, because the Bagisu have at least retained their cooperative, and what is coming to them from their coffee is better.
All right.
But it has been fought to this day. They're still fighting it.
All right. One listener raised the issue of the need to discuss public expenditure, how much money is being actually spent on public administration and things like that, and saying it's one of the areas that we need to look at. Mr. Mukunda.
But you are jumping me. I won't accept.
All right, very quickly.
One red on table and you risk
the lady must be heard.
Yes, just to
Public
respond,
administration.
Yeah, I'm coming to that and details of how government intends to finance the 72.1 trillion. I want to respond to the point I made earlier, saying most of these new kings cropping up are servicemen in the UPDF, and I just want to mention too the head of Dingia.
That's all.
And the Savanyara. They are all from the army. And I hope
there's nothing wrong with that.
I hope we are not going to have funny kinglets cropping up towards the elections. That's my point.
The two came before
because they come towards the elections. I am an election observer, full cycle. I know what I'm talking about. They prop up towards the elections. So away from that, so if you look at our debt portfolio, I know there has been changing figures. Auditor General gives a debt, Bank of Uganda gives a debt, Ministry of Finance gives it. Everybody gives their own debt, and you don't even know what to believe. But the most consistent figure is 97 trillion.
Yes, now.
Current debt, and we plan to borrow 28 trillion. So that one shows you already the percentages of debt versus GDP, where we are going. So when you go to public expenditure, I know we have talked, so much on a broadened government structure. The number sizes, cabinet, 81 or 82 ministers, when the constitutional limit is 42. So you double the constitutional threshold in terms of cabinet. We have a parliament that needs to reduce its size by half through a simple amendment to say that every district will have 2 MPs. One male, one female. You will hit all the gender requirements, global SDG gender equality target, Africa Union gender parity requirement. Our constitution is still below global, you will balance it off. The interest groups, the framers of the constitution provided that
every village will become a district.
No, then we put a moratorium. we stop the creation of unviable district structures. Yes. Then we and even merge the unviable ones. We need to put a criteria like any district that doesn't have an administrative unit, doesn't have a district hospital, doesn't merge back to the original district. These are unviable entities that waste taxpayers' money. We don't need them. Then we need to cut down. The president now has 3 representatives per district. He needs 1, if any. The 2 should be recalled, Mr. President. So we need to go back to then the presidential advisors. I think we are now 137. And all of them have said they never meet the president. So we put if you have 21 or 23 ministries, then create 23 advisors, 1 advisor per ministry. We have shifted to program budgeting. Let's have 1 advisor per program in the budget. Because what is all that correction for? Get an advisor on governance and security, according to the programs in our budget and national planning.
All right.
So that would close that luxurious, wasteful expenditure. It's just a patronage outfit.
All right. Speaking about Parliament, I'm looking at a document here of its budget, Parliamentary Commission. And in the budget, there are 944 billion. Out of this, the Speaker's Office has 13.
Their budget is how much?
944 billion. Out of that, the Speaker's Office has 13.6 8.7 billion. We have the Deputy Speaker, 10.7 billion. Then we have members of Parliament, 545 billion. Again, a number of provisions there in this budget, which suggests that their budget has actually grown, considering what they had last financial year, looking at the figures there therein. But let's now move on
and there is no debate on that budget.
Let's move on to our next topic, and we are going to look at the issue of the sanctions this week. The discussion continued around the issues of sanctions, and I will begin with you, Honorable Mulongo. Last week we had a discussion here about the same issue. This time around we saw the President asking questions and advising that the government should seek clarification from the UK government on why they actually carried out the sanctions, because the Speaker told the President she has no such assets in the UK, but also the IGG said she had not declared any of those assets in line with the Leadership Code Act.
Well, last time I still maintained the position I made previously, that there is an ideological issue in terms of our sovereignty as a country, and then there is also the issue of breaking the law as an officer. When you break the law as an officer or official, you must carry the cross. And I believe that the Speaker will have to account for any facts that will be raised as evidence. Of course, this may not go down the road well if she already has breached the leadership code, because that can be very serious, because we have a precedence over it. The issue that is some of the activities, the sanctions that are meted by the Western countries, some of those things could be done through bilateral means. Before you can boil down to announcing unilaterally those sanctions without even knowing whether they are backed by any evidence or whether they've done any due process and so on and so forth. And particularly when there is a double jeopardy, where somebody is charged in a court of law over the same case, and then you're also increasing the penalty by sanctioning the same person whose matter is still before courts. So those are the issues I thought we should divide, we should separate. But for the crimes that's committed, once we confirmed, people will carry their own crosses.
All right, let's hear from Dr. Sserankuma. Your take on these issues of the sanctions.
It's a circus. It's a multi-layered circus. The sanctioners are in a circus, and the letters that were circulating by Mr. Museveni were also a circus. We are trapped in a multi-layered circus. I have no faith in the sanctioners themselves, right? Because I don't see a reason, if you're concerned about the misuse of public resources, why you would sanction an MP who is a Speaker of Parliament, and you don't sanction a president who uses 2.5 billion every day. You know, if you come to my house and you want to help me with killing rats, you kill the mother rat, not the children of the rats, of the mother, because you go for a Speaker, you have a president who is even an exhibit in a corruption case. You see, and then you're sanctioning a Speaker on corruption. It's a circus.
The 2 billion the president spends every day is budgeted for.
Yeah, but if you're concerned about, if you are concerned about the misuse of public resources, because you see, corruption is a question of integrity. How integral is the use of 2.5 billion a day? What type of integrity is it? You see, for example, let me tell you you know why those people sanction us? Because they believe they give us aid and we benefit from that. You see, the story I think is going to be run tomorrow in the Monitor, showing how we're going to finance our budget and we're going to get grants, budget support, project support. But are you aware, Anderson, that for every single dollar those Western countries give us, they take $24 out of this economy by other means? Are you aware that they take 24 for every single dollar they give us through things as stupid as trade misinvoicing? And they proudly know we trade misinvoice. Our corporations trade misinvoice. They take 24. It's a circus because they're leveraging their aid to us. They give us 21. And through the different things we've gone about, they take 24 out of this economy. Which means basically we actually give them aid. We give aid to Europe, and then they turn around, they say that. So it's a circus. The circus is in the fact that they're leveraging. I don't know what they're leveraging now. Because you see, we have a series of workers. Worker number one is Mr. Museveni. He has big powers. He's a worker for them, because basically he has handed over the economy to them. And there's a worker below Mr. Museveni, who is the Speaker, Anita. Now, I don't know what is this game being played when you sanction your workers. Because they work for you. What they're giving you is access, unrivaled, unrestricted access to this economy. Because you see, when Kalonzo Sserankuma wrote us an opinion where he said Parliament is the bribe itself, you need to question yourself, what then is being bribed for? If Parliament is the bribe from the time of Andrew Cohen, what are they buying when they bribe Parliament? When Parliament is the bribe, what is being bought? Basically, you're selling this country. And who is buying? Our friends who are tying around and sanctioning those who work for them. So for me, I think it's a circus. If they really cared, you know, my friends, my two wonderful friends of mine recently took awards for human rights defending, and I wrote on X that I found it confusing. You know, I found it confusing because, you know, you give money to Mr. Museveni, you buttress his government, he abuses human rights, and then you recognize those who are fighting him for abusing human rights, and then you give him more money, and then he abuses more rights. And then you recognize those who are fighting him. And then more, you give him money. And then you recognize who are fighting him. I'm like, what is this game that these Europeans play with us?
Dr. Sarah Bireete, your take on the issue of sanctions, very quickly.
Well, sanctions, I want to simplify sanctions for the football lovers, and I know many Ugandans watch football. It's simply a red card in a football match. So sanctions can be equated to yellow cards. Those are travel sanctions. Economic sanctions are a red card if you equate it to 11 team players. Once one of the team players is given a red card, they will miss the next 2 matches. We have
provided VR confirms the red card.
We have had
in
this current regime of FNRM, 2 top officials have received something you can equate to red cards. Johnson Byabasheja through the Magnitsky Act sanctions. Yeah, he was sanctioned by America, Magnitsky sanctions, which are both travel and economic sanctions. And now the speaker, with the 2 ministers are just escorting. We
actually told there are many.
Yes, I know there are many people on visa sanctions. Some pronounced, some they get to discover as they apply for visas. So those are that's why I'm calling them yellow cards.
Yellow cards and red cards.
But the red cards are the ones with economic sanctions. So the speaker, who is number 3 in the country in order of precedence, has received a yellow card, a red card from the UK. Sanctions is like
not only the UK, we also saw others in Dubai the other day.
Yes, of course those are partners now. Business is associated to Britain. They all automatically sanction. Right. That's why the economic, I'm calling them a red card. So anybody with interest or with partnership with Britain will automatically sanction the speaker on the economic freeze. Banks, Ugandan banks other than Centenary and Pride might not now operate her accounts and Post Bank. So her accounts now can only run in Post Bank, Pride, and maybe Centenary. The rest cannot. That's what it means. So when why are you laughing? So
yeah, he says Posta is a useless bank. I think
no, he didn't say that.
Yeah,
he didn't say that.
He
wanted to insist.
Why did he find it funny?
No. The impact.
He's actually
the
laughing
impact
about the
of
impact.
Sanctions.
Laughing about the impact.
Yeah. So what President Museveni is doing, because when a government, UK, Britain, deserves the right to sanction anyone they feel they should. It's like saying, I don't want you to come to my house. You will not come. That's all the country is doing. And for them, their work is finished. They have said they don't want these fellows to associate with them.
All right.
End of the story. So, the president's letters and trying to trace property is now Ugandan politics. If the speaker has property in the UK, did she declare in the leadership code? the IG just said she didn't. So the president is
Can
saying,
the UK sanction her with a freeze when she has no property?
but she operates accounts in banks that are associated with Britain.
Okay.
So having property is a by the way. Yeah, you don't have to have physical property.
Okay.
Yeah. So, but now what the president is trying to trace is possibly a ground to remove Anita from office. Anita, sorry. To remove Anita Among from office.
Remove
if she
her?
violated the leadership code, she automatically loses her parliamentary seat and she ceases to be a speaker.
All right, Mr. Mukunda, your comment on this issue of sanctions as a tool for fighting corruption, very quickly, in a few, as we
No,
come
I mean,
together.
I think for me is, depending on the way you look at it, two things. One is, if you shoot in the air and there are any birds around it, I mean, they will all run away. And in terms of money, anybody who wants to begin to invest in this country are begin to ask themselves, okay, what is happening if you can sanction
Number three
in the country? That's one area. So our risk profile has increased. In terms of fighting corruption, in terms of fighting corruption, I'm looking at it in terms of probably, I think that's one daring example that not everybody is unattachable.
All right. I'm afraid time is not our best ally. We have to come to the end of this discussion. I must thank you so much, my dear guests, Honorable Simon Mulongo, Ambassador. Thank you very much for making time to be with us. Dr. Yusuf Sserankuma, political economist. Thank you very much for joining us. Dr. Sarah Bireete, Chief Executive Officer at the Center for Constitutional Governance. Thank you very much for joining us this evening. Mr. Julius Mukunda, Executive Director at the Civil Society Budget Advocacy Group. Thank you very much for making time to actually join us. Thank you, dear listeners, for contributing to this discussion. Your views helped us to shape the discussion here in studio. Now, from me and the entire crew here in studio, we're wishing you a very good weekend.
Spectrum Xtra on Radio 1 FM 90. An extra hour of analysis and discussion of the topical issues of the week.